Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for spending so much time with us today. A couple quick comments and then try to squeeze in a few questions. Let me associate myself with the comments that have been made already about this budget. Listen, I think it's bananas. I think there's celebration happening in Beijing and Moscow every time that we telegraph our withdrawal from the world. I don't know that this budget is the one you would write, Mr. Secretary, but cutting democracy aid by 50%, cutting exchange programs by 50%, global health programs by $2 billion just provides this increasing vacuum for others to fill. And then my second point is on this, I think, interesting exchange you had with Senator Van Hollen about the upcoming plan that the administration is going to present. I think that that would be a satisfactory answer if we were in April of 2017, but we aren't. We're in April of 2019, and the idea that the world doesn't know 2.5 years into this administration whether America still stands for a two-state solution or we still stand against the unilateral annexation of the West Bank is what makes people's heads spin. And so I get that you're not going to go any further in your answer, but we aren't 3 months into the administration. We're 2 years and 3 months into the administration, and that is in part what drives a lot of uncertainty in the region about where America stands, and so I will just leave it at that. On a subject that maybe we can find some agreement on, I just came back from Belfast and Dublin, and we may disagree on the right prescription for Britain moving forward with respect to whether or not they stay in the European Union. But we likely don't disagree on the importance of protecting the Good Friday Agreement. And there is great uncertainty as to what the impact of Brexit would be on the ability to keep that agreement together. It seems like a moment when we should be standing up, Republicans and Democrats, and telling our friends in London that whatever they do, they need to recognize the existing fragility of peace in Northern Ireland and the importance of protecting that peace process no matter how this agreement with the European Union turns out. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
You did find a place we agree. I didn't make light of it. It's an incredibly important agreement, one that has been proven very effective and one that needs to be sustained.
Second, I want to thank you for the investment you've made in the beginnings of peace negotiations in Yemen. You and I have talked about this. And we've also talked about when the right moment is for the United States to play a more active, regular role. I think there's a sense in the region that Secretary Mattis was engaged in a daily basis. I have great respect for the UN envoy, but it seems as we're having trouble keeping the Stockholm Agreement together that it's time for the United States to play a leadership role in maybe a way that we have thus far outsourced to the UN. Your thoughts on whether it's time for a change in U.S. leadership in this process?
We might disagree about this. I think we've played a very constructive role. I suppose we could disagree about whether that's a leadership role, and I certainly think that it has. There's places we're best fit for purpose to achieve the outcome that I think you and I share as our desired end state there. And there's places that we're probably not the best face to put in front of that. We've tried to weigh in where it was and stay out where it isn't. I'm very worried about the Stockholm Agreement. I spoke with the UN envoy, it's been 3 days ago now. There's still hope. There's a lot of pieces to it. I'm happy to give you those long, sorted details, but there's lots of pieces of it. It is not hopeless to think that it'll still be implemented. But frankly, the Houthis have just simply refused to date to agree to a couple of the basic premises which would free up the port there in Hodeidah.
And I agree that they are clearly much more at fault with respect to the implementation of the agreement. I just think we continue to be the only game in town with respect to the ability to bring the Saudis to the table and the ability to convince the Houthis that there will be an honest broker to make sure that the other side complies with the agreements that they make. Lastly, staying on Saudi Arabia, just a couple points of clarification. You are testifying that you believe the administration is in compliance with the Magnitsky Act because you are still gathering evidence. But the Magnitsky Act, which is a piece of legislation passed by Congress, signed by the President of the United States, doesn't give you the unlimited ability to gather evidence. In fact, it states very clearly that not later than 120 days after receiving a request from the chairperson and ranking member of the appropriate committee, you need to submit a response. And so how do you square this very clear requirement that you have to respond in 120 days with your contention that you have unlimited time to collect evidence?
So the State Department did submit a response. Indeed, I know I've submitted 2 responses.
Right, but the response has to determine if that person is engaged in the activity, not defer to a later point as to make that determination.
I think we've fully complied with the statutory requirement.
And lastly, on the 2 American citizens that are in custody, Salah al-Hader and Bader el-Ibrahim, these are new disclosures of dual citizens that have been imprisoned. These are journalists, intellectuals, activists. You mentioned that we can't, there has to be some response, but the only response you mentioned was asking about them with the Saudis. At some point, when they don't answer our requests for release, would we expect some more consequential response from the administration? They're holding Americans prisoner for their political beliefs, and the medical reports out of these prisons suggest that there are some really awful things going on, deprivation of sleep, electrocution, malnourishment. What's the next step here?
So I'm happy to talk to you privately about the range of things that are under consideration. We take every American citizen who's wrongfully detained as a burden, as a duty, as something that we know we have the responsibility that weighs on us, and we work to achieve their release.
Asking is not the beginning and end of our policy.
We'll have lots of tools, lots of different ways to try and get those outcomes. We don't always succeed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.